Sunday. That means here at Hawaii Sports Fans, we got another great guest, and I'm honored today to welcome the candidate, or one of the candidates for mayor of the city and county of Honolulu, and also a former Hawaii football player, a former Hawaii football coach, a diehard sports fan. I know this is a guy that's loves sports because we've all heard his voice, his calls on some broadcasts, some very legendary broadcasts. So we bring in that voice again, and we say aloha to Rick Blangiardi. Welcome to the show, Rick.
Hey, good afternoon, Wayne. Aloha to you, and I'm pleased because I'm a fan to be on this show. This is like a new benchmark in my life. This is very cool.
Well, I'm glad that you're able to find a little bit of sports. This time of year we think about football. Everything is about football. This week we're supposed to play in Tucson. That's the University of Hawaii. Your alma mater, or one of the places you played, and just it's so different. And just talk about that. There's just no football this year. I mean, how are you dealing with it?
Yeah, I mean, it's surreal. I mean, even this morning I was saying to my son Ryan, I was just commenting on the fact that probably today we would have been on a Sunday at this stage of the year, or maybe catching an NFL preseason game, certainly getting ready for UH to play, which I think was next week it would have been. Would we be in that mode, in that mindset? Okay, it's football season, very much looking forward. So, along with all of the other surreal things that have happened to all of us as a result of COVID, this is now, and maybe because we're a little bit battle fatigued, because it's been going on for this unbelievably, interminably long time. But now the prospect of knowing for a while, actually, but now the reality of not having football is one more thing to deal with. It's just really hard to comprehend, It
is. And I think for a lot of us that have been doing it our whole lives, like you have, former player, and we want to start there. Your journey to Hawaii starts at a very pivotal moment for you, actually. I read up that you were planning on playing at the Naval Academy, but then your dad got a job transfer to Hawaii, and talk about your choice to kind of follow him there as well.
Well, if you're going to bring that up, thank you for even bringing that up. That was a long time ago. I graduated from high school in 1964. I was fortunate enough to be a captain with an undefeated state championship team.
Wow.
Catholic high school that was pretty prolific at turning out pretty good athletes, and maybe not on the caliber of St. Louis. Nobody won a Heisman or anything like that, but we had a lot of guys playing college ball, and my particular class was good. I did get recruited by Navy, but I was academically flawed. I have to be really candid here. So, and that's why I was in a prep school, was to get my math SAT scores up. And let me just add one thing, if I can. Between 1960 and 64, all of us who were playing in those years were the sons, if you will, of the guys who were in World War II. So there was a real kind of a sense of patriotism. It was right in the early part of the 60s before everything became pretty crazy. But to get recruited by a service academy meant a lot in families. And Navy, just as a perspective between 60 and 64, actually produced two Heisman Trophy winners, one in Roger Staubach and the other in Joe Bellino. So in the Northeast especially, but even nationally, Navy football was pretty big because of the prowess of those guys. That said, to be recruited by them was a big deal, even though I wanted to go to Boston College. What happened was I went down there, and I realized early on I wasn't really a good candidate to go to the Naval Academy. In those years, there was only one curriculum, naval engineering. So I played, did pretty well, and then signed a letter of intent, had a full scholarship to go to Boston College. But my life changed in the spring of 1965. And I came to Hawaii because my father got transferred to work at Pearl Harbor. It closed down where he was working as a machinist. My mother wanted to come to Hawaii, but not without me, and changed my destiny.
Well, your destiny brought you here to Hawaii. Like a lot of people, it's or those who have transplanted to Hawaii. It's a transition, and you're someone that actually came to Hawaii, went to play at UH, actually, then left and actually went to Springfield, right, and then came back to coach.
Springfield College, birthplace of basketball and volleyball. Yeah, well, when I transferred, I played 2 seasons, and I was fortunate. I had pretty good playing days. It was because my mother got really sick, and we thought she was going to pass. And she had some major surgeries, but to her credit, she lived a few more years after that. But So Larry Price was my coach. He knew the circumstances under which I left. So he would stay in touch with me. And I went back to Springfield because I'd blown any semblance of major college football, but I also knew halfway through college I wanted to coach football, and this was a great school for that. And so I went back there, graduated in '69, started coaching right away at the University of Connecticut, was there for a couple of years. I used to hear periodically from Coach Price, and in 1971, as I was getting ready to go to graduate school there at UConn, Coach Price said to me, "Why don't you come back to Hawaii? I'll let you coach varsity linebackers with me. I just finished my program in educational administration." He got his master's in that same field that I ended up doing. And
wow.
And you know what? I never really quit anything before that in my life. I never really felt like I quit Hawaii. It was just so circumstantial. So that was a chance for me to come back and complete something that got interrupted. It really wasn't like me being some discouraged guy or disgruntled guy who just left. It was very family driven.
Wow. So that's cool. Larry Price, actually, then we can credit him for bringing you back. Larry Price, one of those guys that, legendary voice on the radio and, in the mornings for people driving to work. But you got to work with him. You got to work with another guy that we had on the show, and that's Bob Wagner. We had him on for 2 hours. He could have kept going. That guy can go all day and talk about everything. But talk about your relationship with those guys.
Well, with Coach Price, first of all, I'm always proud to say I survived him because he was my first coach. And when I played for him was his first year. Well, he coached in the Army, but he was a player coach. But here he was, he played in like 3 straight Hula Bowls.
Wow.
When Coach Price was a younger man, he was a real force of nature, really tough. And he had drills that I never even knew existed, if you will. But so we were able to play that, and we always took great pride. And quite honestly, when I was playing, we weren't as good as the teams that I got to coach with him. And we were always very physical defensively. We had great local guys. Also, in those years, that was before the 30 scholarship rule. So we really had the benefit of being able to recruit guys in those days as well. Hawaii had an exemption because we were independent. It was pre-WAC. We didn't have to redshirt because of our geographic location.
Wow.
So we would recruit guys who were recruited by the Pac-10 schools in those years. A lot of guys, everybody thought they were going to go to USC and become whatever, and then they'd get there and they were like 7 on the depth chart, even though they'd been all 4A California. So we actually had some really good players to augment really good local players. In the beginning, we played in the old stadium. My first 3 years here were 8-3, 9-2, 8-3, and losing to only really formidable opponents, beating some really good ones. Probably the most notable win was in 1973 against the University of Washington. We were 50-point underdogs. So that's a good segue. I can't say enough about Coach Price. I could talk to him about an hour because he had so much to do with my destiny. But Bob Wagner was a grad assistant. He had been at Kent State with Don James, and now he'd followed him out to the University of Washington. I'm sure he told you all this. But Don Capers was on our staff. I had the privilege of hiring Don, who went on to NFL fame. And Don told me, I got this grad assistant up at Washington that, I think coach at that time our secondary. And so Dom and I went to Seattle and were involved. Larry made the hire, and rightfully so as the head coach. I like to say I had everything to do with recruiting him and all that stuff. But, so I go back with Wags and bring him to Hawaii. And then, I left coaching in '77 and proceeded to announce all that many years when Dick Tomey came in to be the head coach for the 10 seasons with Jim Leahey. And so proud of Bobby when he succeeded Dick as the head coach. I stand in the record books, the Star Wars a couple of years ago, as the second all-time defensive coordinator under Bobby Wagner. He was the first one. So he had great credentials, good defensive coach. And, bottom line is that that whole period of my life was just magical. Everything about UH football and what we started doing in the mid-'80s and televising it, and everything all the way up through when I left in 1989 to go to Seattle to run a television station called King TV. So that was, for me, my UH was so much a part of my identity as a player, as a coach, as an announcer, and then really, quite honestly, I guess, in the role of producer when we saw the opportunity to bring it to television and all the fun we had with that going back to 1984. initially with football on a one-day delayed basis, but really the magic was doing Wahine Volleyball live in prime time out of Clum Gym.
Cool.
And I could tell you some stuff anecdotally about that, but that's what really, really helped us a great deal.
So TV at that time, it sounds like it's kind of burgeoning. I mean, even the NBA too was delayed, right, at that time. So it's not like live sports was like a big thing.
Here was a deal. I started up. I left coaching. I went to work at KGMB. KGMB in those days was the heritage station. It was the dominant television station, and they did UH sports, but they only Hawaii in those years just 11-game schedule would play 9 home games, 2 away, and they had a contract every year to televise those 2 away games. The only ones that were ever on TV was when Hawaii played away. So I got familiar with selling the football team, but I also got familiar with the 1979 when the Wahine played in Carbondale at Southern Illinois, my son Ryan's alma mater, for the national championship, and knew full well what a great television product it was. So that all predated when I got to KHNL in 1984. So what happened in 1984 is I got there in February. That May, and the station was initially called Kiku. No history of ever doing sports, but at KGMB, I knew men's football, obviously football. I knew the Wahine Volleyball through the national. We did a regional NCAA tournament as well, but also we used to televise rainbow basketball games. We did about 12 or so a year. So UH Sports was on KGMB. It was back in a different era when you could be on a network affiliate and you could take the preemptions. I knew from that, and having spoken around the state, all over the state, all over Hawaii, the grassroots appeal of Hawaii. And I always thought, knowing for a while that the people in the neighborhoods had such great pride that television could be a unifying factor. So the reason why it was a one-day delay was that was the best I could talk Stan Sheriff into as the athletic director, was, to play it safe because they were really worried about hurting the gate. That seemed to be innocuous at the time. We had such great success with that early on that we ended up moving it to same-day delay, and that was even better because in the Dick Tomey era, I think, Wayne, you're a little too young to remember, but we were, I can tell you, Jim Leahey and I would be on the radio, and they put up this attendance at 49,550 people, and we would say, where are those other 450 people tonight? Because there were so many nights when it was up there sold out, and the place would go crazy, and it would rock, And that was even in the years sometimes when, because of the sellouts, we were actually doing simulcasts on radio and TV live, and I mean, it was terrific because, there's no other venue that can seat 50,000 people. So here in Hawaii, right, it's the only opportunity to bring 50,000 people together, and knowing the teams were playing with great intensity and great pride, very, very exciting stuff. It was great.
Was there any sense of apprehension maybe that you'd have less fans at the game because you'd start putting it on television at that time?
No. In fact, that's how I worked my way through that whole season. What I was able to convince Stan, which actually proved, and because we needed to use television to be as inclusive as possible, not exclusive, which is where the product has been for a long time now, and it's been a source of my angst in the 18 years since I came home, at not having the television rights. Once we formed Hawaii News now 10 years ago, and had control over the KHNL K5 operation. So no, it was treated like a television commercial, if you will. I could sell you that shirt you're wearing with good, powerful television commercials, and this is an entree into people's homes and keep the product in front of people.
Yeah.
And sure enough, that's precisely what happened. So the gate didn't hurt. In fact, I remember having conversations with Les Murakami to fast forward to baseball, and they just opened up the stadium, if you can imagine those years before it was named after him.
Wow.
And Hawaii was in baseball, really one of the leading schools in the country, the 3,400 or whatever it was in attendance, but most college baseball teams in bigger countries don't draw that for a game. But here it was just, so nice in that stadium. They were so good. They were really worried. We put that on, and suddenly you had, people clamoring for tickets. So, because that's what we were able to do. And that was true even out of Clum Gym. I knew that experience. All those sweaty nights, we could only seat about 2,200 people watching the Wahine play. They were so great. people knew about Wahine Volleyball.
Yeah.
They Wahine Volleyball was popular throughout the, but nobody was catching that magic because unless you were in the gym, so once we put that on and people could see it, I mean, it really, quite honestly, that's what built the Stan Sheriff Center. With all due respect to the history of men's basketball and even men's volleyball, credit to Dave Shoji and his guys, women's volleyball, I can tell you firsthand, because I remember over beer with Stan Sheriff on napkins talking about building that arena. It was women's volleyball, Wahine Volleyball, that drove the success of that.
Well, I mean, the growth of athletics in Hawaii, I mean, that was pivotal, that time going from independent, becoming Division I, growing certain sports. But at that time, too, you talk about this fan support, you talk about where those other 450 people, I mean, we're clawing now today to get, half of that. 450 people. So, I mean, and I shared it earlier today, the editorial on Hawaii News Now. You in November of last year, right before Hawaii plays San Diego State for the West Divisional title. In my opinion, one of the biggest games, probably in 20 years. One of the biggest games in history, probably, of the stadium, maybe of importance. And we couldn't even we barely got 20,000, I think, for that game.
Barely got 20,000. And I think I watched that today. I hadn't seen that since I did it, whatever. And I could see my enthusiasm, if you will, but I was really angry, to be honest with you, because Ryan, my son, comes to me. I've had season tickets since I finished coaching, and our section used to be packed. Now we're like the only ones in it, And I look right across the field at the student section, which has always been challenged, to be honest with you, because UH has been always more of a kind of a community team. The student body section was small. But still, yet, when you would see it, there was all these empty orange seats. You sit there and you could count on one hand almost, it seems. And I'm being facetious, but it was pretty much like that. I mean, it was just sad. I mean, because as I tried to emphasize as eloquently as I could, I mean, it's just you just said it, one of the biggest games. You would think in a town that prides itself on being. So here's the thing, we get that. Hawaii fights for that berth to be in that situation, which they actually go on to win. And yet, before that, we sell out 50,000 for the Cowboys and Rams game. Before that season, in a matter of hours, maybe a couple of days, but a matter of hours. So you knew there was an appetite. I know it's the NFL, but it was preseason. Still, yet people hungry for football. So that's the disconnect. See, I maintained all along. I said earlier, we were inclusive. We were showcasing it, not to the detriment of the gate, to create a desire in people to want to go and be a part of it. Over the years, what happened was they made it exclusive. And I'm not going to denigrate Spectrum because it doesn't do any good. It's not necessarily their fault. They made the deal. But once they start putting this stuff on pay-per-view, cable-only operation with really no promotion, whatever, it pulled it away from a lot of people. Okay? And, at the end of the day, that's the opposite of what we were doing before. And so I think what's happened is just we eroded over time. They relied too long on a fan base that seemed so loyal. But as people got older, they stopped going because of whatever, even in the different venues, not just Aloha Stadium. People pass on, whatever, they start to lose that base. And as we said earlier, the student base was never really there. Where are you going to bring, when you see in the mainland these stadiums that are packed, because when these kids, at the time when they were kids going to college, they tailgated, they went to the stadium. After they graduate, they want to go back and continue to be a part of it. We kind of lost that. So we had that great older fan base. They got a little too old, got too expensive for them. We didn't do anything to cultivate the younger fan base. I mean, this happened over a period of time. It wasn't like a suddenly thing. But once you've lost them, you can't just bring them back. And beyond that, the university never really did anything to market to the fan base. I mean, honestly, you think about it. There was very little promotion, if anything, creating awareness, creating a demand. None of that. We've been void of that. So you had a product being seen on the air on the pay-per-view basis with no marketing effort behind it to create awareness or an appetite to go to the games. And over time, you wonder why there's nobody in the stands. You got to market this product in today's world. So you were saying earlier, Wayne, about it being a societal shift. Yeah, there's some truth to that. The bigger stadiums, everybody is suffering some fan erosion. But I believe here in Hawaii, we have such a tremendous whether it's football or any sport you want to talk about, incredible fan base for sports, highly active people who are out and doing all kinds of things that, given the size of the venues and given who we are, given our isolation, given the quality of the teams, we should be able to put a lot of people in all those venues. And just because it's also a recreational thing to do, and it's always been the number one show. So missing on that is really really sad in my opinion, because I think the UH program, the teams, the men and women, those men's teams, women's teams that play, and we know because of the national standings, compete at a very high level, compete really well, should be better attended. Should really be better attended.
And we talked about how being inclusive means we want to sell the product on television so that more people know how great it is in the house.
Don't charge people for an away game. How about that? Who the hell's going to pay $75 for an away game? If you're not even interested in the home games because of the circumstance, now they're going to go away. It's a big, you can't afford that.
As you know, there's been a huge paradigm shift in terms of how programs have been funded, in terms of, and it is in that way as well that you said is television. That's the way that they've gone, and the SEC and the Power Five have commanded huge contracts, and that's left a lot of the mid majors behind. That includes UH. I mean, would you say? Well, I mean, some will say that pay-per-view is that's money to compensate us for not being in a major conference, and we have to pay these subsidies. But
it's nickels and dimes. A couple of $1 million a year that they're getting is, you know what? We were prepared to pay that when I tried to get the contract back because it would have been to the benefit of K5 or whatever. A couple of $1 million in local broadcast rights is, I know it sounds cavalier, over a couple of $1 million. The big money comes from being aligned in a conference, if you will, like, let's say, the Pac-12 and the revenues. In fact, their contract is almost up. I was up there last year making some private inquiries to try to determine, just before Nick's last year, before he left, actually. And I had meetings. I took meetings at UCLA, I took meetings at Arizona State, and actually discussions with Larry Scott, the Pac-12 commissioner. And I can tell you that there wasn't a snowball's chance in hell in Hawaii could get into that. They weren't interested in expanding. And my point is that in 2 years' time, in 23, their contract is up. And I could give you a lot of insight on this, but in that contract now, they didn't like their last deal, even though they got, I think every team got 20-some odd million. They're going to look to do, this is what they told me, a multi-year deal to the tune of probably a 20-year deal. Going to be worth billions of dollars, billions with a B in revenue for that conference. And they were looking at different players like Amazon, and the world has changed in television rights. I remember when ESPN first came out, everybody said, "What the hell is that?" That kind of thing. But and there are other networks as well. But that's what they're looking at in long-term commitments. And so we're up there, and I was up there personally in trying to explore their interest in us. And first of all, they said we would never expand by one; we'd have to do it by two. They ruled out BYU, San Diego State, Utah State, pretty much any school you might think of, because even though they took Utah and Colorado in the last expansion, because we didn't have, they don't have the research base. Hawaii actually academically is qualified, has a research school, but you have to come from a sister school. But the bottom line to all that was we also had no home attendance, so so we would not be accretive to any viewing audience. In their opinion, we're also suffer from being a small market. It was hard enough taking on Colorado and Salt Lake City, not big television markets. So that's not really good. And candidly, what I learned, and probably, well, now so much after it doesn't make a difference, but they were struggling to keep USC and UCLA in the Pac-12 because a lot of conferences in this realignment for these mega contracts were trying to woo the two LA schools out of the Pac-12. And when it comes to money, I mean, UCLA this year were operating at a deficit. So a big deficit. So Dan Guerrero just retired as the dean of the Pac-12 coaches, but they were in a deficit more like $18 million or whatever. So, from the standpoint of college sports, big business, etc., they wanted to make sure they could keep those schools intact. There's nothing sacrosanct that said they couldn't leave for a better deal, given the fact that football funds so many of the other programs, they become so expensive. So they want to take care of that. So they made it really clear to me they weren't interested in splitting the money 14 ways. They'd rather split it 12 ways. But at least we made a run at finding out what the feasibility was.
I mean, and the first point you brought up was the fans. And I think to a lot of people in Hawaii, if you said, oh, Pac-12, just like kids, right, when they graduate from high school, oh, I like go Pac-12, and I like play at UH, I'm too good for UH or something, we're just this, I don't understand, we're a Division I team, like you said, we should be marketed better, we should be, and top of mind for our athletes, but at the same time, that allure of a Power 5 name or being attached would bring, in my opinion, would fill the stadium.
Well, yeah, it would. That was the whole reason why I was up there. I went up there to do that. No, it would. First of all, look at your non-conference games and what you would schedule and what you would have for conferences. Because one of the things I know for a fact that Hawaii fans will turn out for a decent opponent.
Yes.
Even though, despite what we just said, they take a whole marketing effort with this. What we just said about the San Diego State game before, but suddenly there is prestige. It's well known on the major schools. Plus, it would really be a great enhance for us, for the university, even academically, right? Not to even mention what that money would buy us and being part of the conference. And they made it clear to me also we wouldn't go in there for the first however many years on an equal share. You have to tear it up. Still, yet it would be very lucrative. So this would be a great enhancement academically, athletically, and a source of pride for the community, okay?
Absolutely.
You need a lot of people in line wanting to do that.
Yes.
And we don't have those people in line. As case in point, we drop Arizona this year when we think we're going to have a football schedule, and we book Robert Morris. That is the antithesis of what you and I are talking about from the standpoint of a vision, a big idea, big dreams. Let's ramp up. Let's play the best in the country. You can't do that. So, we have a new head coach. I've not met him yet. First time going back to 1965. There's been a guy in the job I've not met in the head coaching role. But be that as it may, it's not about me meeting him. I'm just saying we're going to have to wait a whole other year and we'll see where we are.
Well, in a whole nother year, it's possible that you'll be mayor. And, it's not UH is obviously a state agency, but as the city, as being a steward of the city, and on Oahu, Manoa being a part of that, I mean, how can you enhance, sports in general? Well, we'll start with UH themselves, so we'll focus on them. And is there?
Nobody's asked me that question, Wayne. I think the first thing I'll do is I'll make you sports information director.
Of Oahu, I'll take it.
And I'll tell you, Wayne, fill the stadium. Yeah, nobody's asked me that. To be honest with you, I haven't really thought about that per se, but that is a nice notion because I do think it's an incredible cultural event when we go to these venues. And I know it from firsthand. I've been, whether you're in the Sheriff, go back to the old Clum Gin, study at Aloha Stadium. I mean, it's an incredible experience. And one of the things I used to like to say, I haven't said this in a while, one of the things I learned early on, back in the old stadium days, when I first began to even look at the OIA and the ILH and how it used to pack the old stadium, and then even the years that I came back and coached, because in those years we used to fill the stadium as well, and all the years, is that, it wasn't like just the team won when we won, especially big games like Hawaii won. It went like it went through everything. And, we saw summers of that when everybody went down to the Sugar Bowl, that year, the incredible pride. And we've seen it other times too, but I get that. That's something to be mined, if you will, as part of our life here. And so, and I'm not just saying it because I'm an alum of the university and with the grad school there. It's that profound, we ought to. So if there's opportunities for me, if I'm fortunate enough to get elected mayor, I'm going to look at that and do everything I possibly can as part of. We talk about a great city as part of the experience living in a great city. I realize that right now things are daunting because of the impact of COVID. I get that. I'm not naive. But this could be a really great thing to help, So.
Well, I mean, one way, we had Senator Glenn Mackay on this program, and he talked about the new stadium and a rail stop that's there as well. So is that something, have you been a part of any of that planning, or have you been a part of the stadium at all?
No, the only thing I was asked is they did some due diligence. and those of us who had some background or whatever came through, and I answered a bunch of questions a bunch of years ago. I can tell you this though, when I was talking to Dan Guerrero when I was doing I did the Power 5 trip, you know, even in the Rose Bowl, they're having some attendance issues with beginning to slide some, right? And he said that the new schools, he had a fixed venue. USC had one, whatever, you know. Even Michigan, believe it or not, is you know, it's hard to say you put 105,000 in, you've lost a few thousand, anybody cares, right? But
I know.
Still, you know. But they said the new thinking is, you know, to think about building to the fan experience and how best you can manage that fair experience. So, you know, Boise has a 35,000 seat stadium. So did Baylor just build this incredible. You know, there's some really. So I was always wanted to 50,000. In fact, I could tell you a story about at one point 50,000 wasn't big enough, and I was kind of involved with Stan Scherf. We were talking about how to fill in the pukas.
Yeah.
We could put, just so you know, in those. You know how the stadium is built? It's 11,000 in each end zone. Did you know that?
No, I didn't. Okay, interesting.
Okay, 11,000 in each end zone. It's 14,000 on each side. If you look at that line in the middle, those are 7,000 fan quadrants, 4 quadrants.
Ah,
so
interesting.
At one point, we looked in filling in because it was originally built for baseball. So we decided, we just got determined because you could no longer move. The stadium wasn't movable anymore. It was a really bad idea that they sold them. But so if we were looking at, this is going back to when Stan was alive. I'm going back a lot of years ago, and we were looking at, and his Tomey packing the place, and 50,000 we didn't think was going to be enough. You know, you even had the Pro Bowl coming in those years. Late great Makiana Gazawa, everybody, these guys had vision, and things were happening. We're thinking football fever is so big in Hawaii. So we looked at architectural renderings of if we could fill in those pukas and make it a bowl. It was never designed to do the kind of suites that they do now. You know, that they just at that point we weren't there. You know, you basically have the two press boxes, and they're pretty remedial press boxes, I might add. But that said, those pukas would have added 4,000 each. So we actually had the potential to expand the stadium to 66,000. Oh, wow. And it was a time when we were seriously talking about doing that, keeping it a pure bowl. Yeah, pretty cool, huh?
Wow.
Yeah.
That would have been crazy. Well, I went to Rice. Okay, so I went to see us play Rice, and they're like in a 75,000 state stadium, and they get like 2,000 people a game. So like I could see that going badly as well, even worse.
Well, that was that. But you know, we were talking. My point of that was at that time that seemed feasible, and it was like almost a demand, and we had that kind of pent up, like 50s not up. So when they come back to bring it back. And talking to them, I got off that 50,000 because it was clear they didn't have an appetite to build another 50,000 seat stadium. I kind of got my head around, if you had a good 35,000 seat stadium, but what is lacking right now that they could incorporate in doing it, and this would have to take a whole lot of marketing and know, but make it a great fan experience. Yes. Make it for the venue. If you could do that, okay, as opposed to capacity, build for fan experience versus capacity. And if you could do that, a good 35,000 seat stadium, which you could use as a multi-purpose stadium too, from the standpoint of the kind of community asset, it could work. And that could be a good number.
You know, a lot of us, like myself, I mean, we see sports as a unifier. We see it as something that is, you can derive pleasure from it from so many different angles, and it brings together so many people from across different spectrums. So. Political spectrums, everything. But how do you see in more vague terms, in abstract terms, sports and its role in, like you said, it being a part of the community?
It's everything you just said, Wayne. It's a unifier. I mean, especially here, like I said earlier, about when the team won, Hawaii won. And when the teams even win now, you can sense that pride when the men's volleyball team was playing for all women, all that stuff. Or for that matter, the success of the football team, and so it's good. It's I said earlier, we're gonna make this a great city, even though university state run. Those experiences are part of city life, right? It's no different than if I go out and I book,
Yeah.
name a rock group you'd like to see. It's the same thing. When this stuff is happening, get people engaged, right? Like that.
Well, and I talking about other events. Can we at the city level attract? I know, at Telemundo, you obviously know how important football Mexicano is to a lot of people. And I'm in LA as an LAFC fan as I am. I know Telemundo broadcasts a game, and probably more people are watching that broadcast in the English, language.
I was there. We got the whole thing away from Univision. It was a real source of pride. But we weren't ready to tell it. It was out in the front, and then we sold the company, and I came back to Hawaii. But I will tell you, I have stood in LA in the streets looking at store windows during soccer, like little mini arenas, because these people that have televisions home, and the pride. And it's that's one of the great things about sports.
Absolutely.
It's just so it's also part of, it's almost soulful. It's not just a unifier. It's the experience of it. And look, I've been in enough venues in my life in different places, whether it was Fenway Park, even the old Vet in Philadelphia. I could tell you a lot of venues. You go there, it's just, Yankee Stadium, their playoffs. I've been there more than a few times. I mean, it's like crazy how good it feels. You know what I mean?
I know.
It's just you know what I mean? It's like,
it's good. It's a good segue into another Hawaii sports fans commercial I can do in the middle, because that's what we do. Take people on tours. We went to our Fenway game when UH played at Amherst. We went through Springfield. We went to the Basketball Hall of Fame. We went to Cooperstown Baseball Hall of Fame. We went to Yankee Stadium, all on one trip. So that's what we do at Hawaii Sports Fans, and you can't. Blangiardi knows.
Cool. I respect that.
And it's all about that experience, like you said, and that's why it's so pivotal, I think, to get that experience right when we bring people in to these venues. And like I said, at soccer games, I'm new to being a soccer fan, and wow, it's like the next level. But can these events be something that maybe Rugby World Cup, that the city can co-opt along with Hawaii HTA or something to try and track?
And I remember when Mufi was mayor, I was on the sports commission, and I heard him during this campaign talk about how we're going to recalibrate tourism. We were all talking about that, given what's happened. But different kinds of experiences. In some of the tour, I think there's a lot of possibilities with that. We should be looking at that. I mean, we just already brought it up today. What happened with the NFL preseason game a year ago, and I think that we both know. Everybody knows that might be even watch this. One of the things we have going for us is incredible cachet, right? Hawaii is just magic. It's magic the world over. Athletes even like to come here, and whatever it is. And so, there is a real possibility there to do some of this stuff. And I actually think it will be probably necessary, if I get involved as a mayor, since you asked me this question, it would be probably also necessary in trying to help us rebuild a lot of what we need to build about feeling good about living here, because, it's pretty daunting right now, and people are dealing with things like foreclosure, feeding, loss of job. I mean, we've got a ways to go. I think one of the things in the road ahead that could really help will be through sports.
Yes. I agree. I totally agree. And I think, sports and its role in daily lives for children, for fitness, for adults. I mean, it bridges that generational gap for us Keiki Okaina people who grow up in Hawaii, and our grandparents. I mean, that's such a huge part. And my grandparents were a part of that stock of fans, of that 49,000 fans back in the day. But is there a way? How can we, re-spark, because that was so beneficial for the program and for Hawaii and culturally, how it's passed down as a tradition. The football team, for UH football, for example. But do you see we're still going that way, or do you see like the city kind of transitioning to a place where we're prioritizing differently?
Well, I don't know about the city or whatever. I think a lot of those calls are made with the university. So I was kind of curious to see what they were going to do this year with a new head coach, given how successful Nick was. At the end of 4 years, leaves and goes to Washington State. Everybody should be proud of that. Todd Graham comes in here with a big bio and track record of what they were going to do to put people in the seats. But then everything got upside down a number of months ago, so it's really hard to tell, right? Because we got shut down in March. Which might be right around the window not long after he was hired to really start to. So I don't know what they were going to do, but look, first of all, it's not inexpensive, but secondly, it is a market effort. You've got to build back a fan base. That's a concerted deal. You just can't say we're playing a certain team if people have not been following it. So how do you build back that interest and that passion? I think there's a possibility there, but it's going to take a real concerted effort. And you got to realize that the people are just not going to go, which is why they didn't show up to San Diego State in such a pivotal game. That in and of itself. I tell you, when I was coaching, I had a couple of signs in my office. I didn't have many signs in those days, but one of them was a sign that I learned from George Allen, a great legendary NFL coach. He wrote a book, The Future Is Now, and I copied it. It just simply said, the team is never up. The team is never up. So what does that mean? That meant that as a coach, you had to understand how to take your players to get them through practices in a peak state of mind for a game. Don't sit there and just rely on the fact that we're both undefeated with 5-0 teams and we're going to play somebody and whatever. The team will get up for that. You had to own that as a coach, okay, to get your guys game ready. And always just, because how many times you've seen guys in big games, a team will come out flat and everybody goes, what the hell is going on? How could you guys be flat? Fans are pumped, whatever. But you have to do that. I would say it's the same thing with the community. It's just not going to show up and be up no matter what you've got to work that to get them into that. There's been nothing on that going along. And I'm not saying this to denigrate anybody, but I just finished running the largest multimedia company in this state for a lot of years. I know who used us, who didn't use us, and we did so much to promote Nick Lovich's show. Before I never did Norm's, but then I did McMackin's and June's. That's the history. But we ran promos for Nick's show all the time. That's all we had. We didn't have any games to give us leverage. Just that, because I was making a statement. And we got great viewership, even when Nick on the Rolovich show for a coach's show on a Sunday night at 10:30, because we made people aware of that.
Yes.
And even though Nick did other things, that show and that 26 minutes that we had on Sunday nights, and we showed it again on Monday, I wanted to do that. But you want to get people the power of money to come out to games. You got to market that product. There's none of that. I mean, there's none of that. You see some half-ass schedule run on ESPN with low ratings, and it's not broad appeal. This is, it's like that.
Well, one thing I want to bring up, you talked about Aloha Stadium, and you were around, obviously, you talked about that. But you talked about it opening as a baseball field. Was it because of the Islanders?
It was going to be a baseball field. The Hawaii Islanders had a lot of success here, and that's why they built the portable stadium. And in the first few years it was here, it would go into a baseball configuration. I remember going to Islanders games. It was really because Hawaii at one time, because it had been a AAA city for so long, really thought it was a candidate for. There were people in this place who loved baseball, right?
Really?
We really thought we would become an expansion city, either to Major League Baseball or possibly with Japan. I mean, that was the kind of
that'd be so cool.
Yeah. So that's why they built the portable stadium for a AAA club. With the potential is maybe we'd get baseball more than football, as opposed to just building a football stadium. And that just was never to be. And it wasn't too many years after. You talked earlier about the Rice. I went to Islander games. You put 3,000 people in the stands at 50,000 seat stadium. It's like nobody's there, or 4,000 or 5,000. So it just never really worked as far as the prospects. And of course, things became very different anyway. And I was never part of the feasibility of getting a team from Japan, but that was, and I was around. That was the kind of talk that was it was being given. More about the potential of Major League Baseball than football.
When you talk about the talk, who was it? Like the governor was in on it. Who were like with the president of UH?
Or? You had some guys who were real visionaries. I mentioned Mackie Yankazawa's name. Great guy, great visionary. Had a lot to do with not only the Hula Bowl and the Pro Bowl, but there are other people. I wasn't exactly sitting down with the governors or whatever, but I was in the know enough to know when I was assistant coach what they were talking about. I was there on opening night. We did the parade. The next night we played Texas A&I and got killed in our home opener there. But I remember about the birth of that stadium, and even as excited as we were to migrate or what it meant for maybe the potential of the program. Remember, these are all pre-WAC days, and we had some notions about, getting into a big conference and even maybe the WAC in those days to kind of legitimize us. It was really great in scheduling before all these rules came in, because we could play teams. If they played Hawaii, they got an exception to play an extra game. So depending on their willingness, and back in those days, it wasn't looked upon as it has become in recent times. It seems that guys complain, well, I go to Hawaii, my guys get all distracted and jet lagged, and not only that, you go over there and get beat. And what good is that if that happens?
Yeah.
But it used to be looked upon as it was a recruiting tool for them, that Hawaii was on the thing. And of course, it was the same thing for us. We're playing, USC or whatever else. Look at the people we play, So it was all good in those days. It was all good. So that was the whole idea of moving the stadium. We had big plans for football, but it was always overshadowed by the baseball conversation. Yeah.
Well, you talked about this parade. I've never heard about this parade. Where was this parade, and what was it about?
The opening night, the Friday night before, was at the stadium actually, and we were there with the university. They brought high school teams. Like, how you've ever seen a halftime, like in the Pro Bowl? You got all these extra, they fill up the whole field. It was like one of those that night,
Oh, cool.
A bunch of us. We're all backed up in the tunnel and outside the stadium. We all walked in, and we sang, Star Spangled Banner, I guess, and Hawaii Ponui, and it was like that. Whatever else.
Wow, interesting.
It was it was a pretty cool evening. It was distracting for our players per se, because they played the next night. Didn't make any difference because Texas A&I was a bandit school. Texas A&I was an NAI national champion, and their school had a prison next to it, and they used to have these. It was crazy. They had players that were like crazy good. Not the least of which was their quarterback, who was right for athlete, played there for Darrell Royal and became the quarterback's coach at University of Texas. Wow. But I still remember this guy named David Hill that was their tight end. He was a man playing with boys. I remember sitting in the dugout before the game. They walked into the field, our opening game at Aloha Stadium. This guy comes in and he jumps up behind the goalpost, his hands wrap around him, and starts doing pull-ups behind the neck at the goalpost. And all I could think of was this guy's hands. He went on and played in the NFL for years. I think he made All-Pro at Detroit. Wow. His hands literally, because I remember the vision, were like wrapped around the goalpost. This guy was, he was a man-child. I don't know how old he was, but he was a hell of a player. It was like that.
Well, that was definitely a memorable night in the stadium. But I want to bring up another memorable night, 1989, that you were there for, and it's talked about all the time by UH fans. My grandparents, talked about all the time and raised me on the stories of those BYU games. But yeah, specifically that first one, 89, and you can talk about 90 as well. But what do you remember about those nights?
Well, the 89 game was special for me because it was the last game that Jim Leahey and I broadcast. But what sometimes I have to say this is, Wayne, forgive me for the indulgence because I was coaching, but and I forget the year. I think it was 72 or 3 in the old stadium. We beat a really good BYU team, 15-13. Reinhold Stupers took 5 field goals. This was a team that later on that year won the WAC, or went to some Astro Blue Bonnet Bowl or something.
Wow.
Very good bowl.
This was at Honolulu Stadium, you said.
The old Honolulu Stadium. That gets overshadowed. That gets in my coaching years, and they were a really, really good team. Now, admittedly, that was before Jim McMahon. They had, I forget the Jay Miller. They had a guy who played in the NFL. They had good teams, and Littell Edwards was the head coach. Now, but you fast forward all that many years later, and now year after year, the frustration during Dick's years of coaching, and did the games home and away, the big rivalry, had them on the ropes a number of times in the fourth quarter, could never beat them. Hard-fought games, tremendous attendance, both home and away. They'd pack it up there, we pack it here. Big television audiences. It was a great rivalry. And so now it's 1989, and it's early on in the season, the second or third game or whatever. And if you watch the video, it's every now and then, Ryan will play an excerpt from that game. But you could feel it that night. I could feel it. The fans could feel it. The time had come, and they had a really good team. And sure enough, we took it to them. And we didn't just beat them by 5. We took it to them. It was the last game I ever, well, not actually years, when I came back a number of years ago, Jim and I did a game for old time's sake. But the last real game that, after 13 years of doing it together, was that night, and it was a very emotional night for me. But it just culminated after years of frustration, and this place went great. And that's what I know. You could feel that. That was back in the days, honestly, when our press box, and it wasn't as rusted out as it is today. You always would worry about it collapsing. The place would be rocking. We'd be going up and down the press box. It was incredible. And to feel that, and that's why it was such like a spiritual event. It was certainly a cultural. It was like people were, and so it was a lot of fun too. I mean, I haven't used that little F word all day. It was a lot of fun. It really was a lot of fun. And and then in those years, Jim and I did post-game shows. We were on the air for quite a while, so we were the last guys out of the stadium. I mean,
wow.
and you could hear the call-ins and whatever, not just for that BYU game, but even throughout it. There were a lot of big games, a lot of big upsets, and it was you could feel it. It permeated every place. It was great.
What aspect of the the program back then do you think we could go? I mean, something that maybe a tradition or a part of the game that we can bring back, or a tradition you would like to see brought back maybe to today's.
Well, that's a good question. I mean, winning was the best tradition. We were winning a lot,
Yeah.
It probably starts with that, because
yeah.
I'm not so sure if they hadn't been winning, if we had junk teams or we were falling, we would have become so rabid. There was.
Well, were there a lot of high school talk about, because we talked about the disconnect, because on Friday nights people are watching high school football in Hawaii or going to games, and on NFL Sunday they're watching NFL Sunday, but somehow they forget to show up at the stadium. So what was that relationship back then?
Yeah. Well, I thought you were going to go up and talk about how it was always hard, by the way, to recruit local guys. We had good numbers, but it's always been the case of somebody who's. Look, I still remember trying to recruit Mosi Tutupu. And I remember Mosey telling me, "Coach, I really like you, but I'm going to USC, man." no doubt about it. It was like that. It was always that.
One day they're gonna name an award after me. That's what's gonna happen. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, exactly. So
wow.
So there was that reality. But as far as recruiting, I don't know what traditions. I think I mean, that's when we started the senior war, all that stuff. But that was at the end of the year. I think it was just honestly. What was really cool, I remember this, I'm not saying this for any ego aggrandizement, but that was back in the years when a lot of people would come to the stadium and they'd have their headsets, you see it on them, and honestly, I can remember Leahey and I would go at each other every now and then, and I'd say something, and people would laugh. You could hear people laughing in the stands. They were that in tune with it, or they were relying on us to really give them the color and the where they were and just make it exciting. I think that's been another thing. I think the broadcast teams have not been quite the same. Not just me. I think it was a special era, and we made it fun, and we made it accessible. People were listening on the radio. They were watching on TV, and they were going to the games. So that's what I meant by inclusive versus exclusive, So it was like that, and we won. And we played good teams. And we were underdogs, and we upset people. And that was always like cool. And Dick used to drive me crazy. I love Dick Tomey. But we went at it off and on, because we used to do a show and all this stuff, and you're doing color, and if you like a call you made about something, I'd brag on his unimaginable offense, but they played defense, but it was always in a good way. But they were just well coached. He used to always say, "I just want to have a chance to win." And so many times, even games we lost, sure enough, he would get his teams in position in that fourth quarter. I remember one year we had Michigan tied 25-25. Schemblicher was coaching, and this is a Rose Bowl bound team that year in the stadium in an afternoon game, and it was crazy good. It was like, it doesn't get any better than this game on the line. We ended up losing the game, but it was like that. You know what I'm saying? It was like that. And that meant so much to this community and for all those guys who played. That's the stuff that lasts a lifetime. Even in losing it, remember, they took them all the way down the wire, fourth quarter. So I love that stuff.
Well, man, you brought back that 1973 UW game. You were on that team as well, or you're coaching that team?
I was coaching.
Okay.
My 27th birthday, linebacker coach.
Wow.
Game ball is in my house. I could bring it out right now.
Wow, really? You have the game ball? Wow.
Well, look, when I left coaching, there were 2 game balls that day.
Mm-hmm.
I got one because I was coaching defense. Mm-hmm. And so that night I stayed up all night long at the old Olympia Hotel. I cut that game ball up. And I wrote on ballpoint pen, Hawaii 10, Washington 7, and the date, September 15th, 1973. I gave every guy in the defense a piece of that ball. I had that for years.
Cool.
When I left coaching years later, Coach Price had the other game ball because Dave Holmes was the head coach. Mm-hmm. And Larry that day was the defensive coordinator, was linebacker. But the defense won that game. We had 4 goal line stands in that game in the second half.
Wow.
Okay? And that was opening day at Husky Stadium. And Jim Owens, that year, he ended up getting fired. You know, they took that away because we broke their backs, and they didn't go on to have a very good season. They were good. They were picked that day. That was the old Pac-8 football. Says it. They were picked to win the Pac-8 that year. I'll give you a quick anecdote on that. What happened in that game was that was the era right after Sonny Six Killer. Mm-hmm. So Jim Owens had fired his offensive staff, brought in, and they were going to run this hot new offense, the veer option, the Houston veer. Okay. They brought in this great quarterback to do it. His name was Anderson. He was a beautiful looking athlete. And on the second series, I don't like to take relish in some player getting hurt, but our defense took him out of the game. In fact, he didn't play it again. It was a kind of game stopper. It was a compression fracture type of thing in his neck.
Oh, my God.
So anyway, this guy comes in to run the same offense, who is backup quarterback, the 6th kid, who's a drop back passer, and this guy can't run the offense. So now they rely on their 2 power backs. And he can't throw the ball because the drop back passer, we were really good at attacking them and playing. We had Jarris White at one corner, played in the NFL for 12, Harold Stringett, 6th-round draft pick, Kenny Shibata, and the strong safety who played in Canada for 6 years and a couple of years with Cleveland, and Mike Perkins, a dear friend of mine from Kamehameha Schools, at free safety. I mean, we could play man all day against these guys. So they couldn't, we were blitzing like hell because we could cover them, and he couldn't pass, so they just relied on their ground game. They had these 2 backs, Pete Garrison, Junior Bonner, you could check it out. They were both like all Pac-8. So Jim Owens was notorious for smash mouth football. We take his quarterback out. He's got a backup quarterback. They can't pass. They're going to run it down our throats. And that's how we won that game because they couldn't. A little bit of bend, but no break, and we stuffed them. It was a great victory.
Man,
so anyway,
4 goal line stands. That's amazing.
Ryan would have to get a call. I'd have to go get the football, and I'd show it to you fans. Ryan, the football in my cabin.
Yeah, Ryan's got to grab that for us because
he's going to go get it. He's on a phone call. He's going to go get it right now. I'll show it to you. So I left coaching. Coach Price gave me this game ball. I've cherished it all these years.
Wow.
So we both had one. My players all got one. I cut it up. Okay, I stayed up all night to do that. Okay, and I thought that was a cool thing, and I forget where I learned that from, but I just thought every player in that defense deserved a piece of the game ball. Wow. But I always kept the one that Coach Price gave me.
What was the reception like at home? Do you remember what people were talking about the game, or what was it like back on the island?
Well, when we came back, we went 9-2 that year. Here it is, right here. Can you see it right there?
Cool. Yep. Wow.
Okay.
September 15th, 1973. Wow.
And it's got U of W. Yep. The old Pac-8. I'm trying to look where it says that, but it's old Wilson football. Some of the years come out, but there it is. It's cool, huh?
Very cool. Wow.
You know why this stays with me, aside from the great memory? I'll tell you why. I used to keep this in all my offices in different places. Yeah, in one part, being a football coach. But what this ball reminds me, we were prohibitive underdogs. I remember leaving the hotel in those years. There was a guy named Jimmy the Greek on television, and it just so happened we were watching football in the morning. We had to go. It was an afternoon game. And as we're leaving, sure enough, his prognostication comes on. And he talks about, and in the West, the Huskies are playing the Rainbows, he goes, and what should be a laugher, Washington by 55 or something. I mean, it was about as insulting as you could get. So last thing we saw, we went out there, opening day, Husky Stadium, sold out, They had big expectations, new quarterback, all this other stuff, new offense, and this is what happened.
Wow.
So that to me was always, because a lot of the settings I've been in business were about being underdogs or overcoming adversity or pulling off the unexpected. And so this ball has always been a reminder to me. Plus, it was signed by a lot of great guys.
Ooh, chicken skin from just hearing you talk about that time, that era, and also your next battle, your next fight. Like you said, doing things that people didn't expect, and maybe no one ever expected Rick Blangiardi to be mayor, but that's a possibility. And we're an hour in, and I told Ryan I only keep you an hour, so just wanted to give you a chance to address everyone if you want before you get off.
Well, look, let me just be as humble and as honest as I can. I never saw this chapter coming in my life. But I've been in leadership roles my whole life, my playing days, my coaching days, all the way through what was a 43-year broadcast career. I had a perception that we had a leadership crisis in our town for a lot of reasons, without denigrating necessarily elected officials. But we've gone through the Kealoha trial, we've gone through the office of a lot of stuff. And a lot of people have been talking to me about it. I've loved this place since 1965. It's been my home. My kids were born here. I got educated here. So much of my work has been here. And in the midst of looking at that, and a lot of people tell me, Rick, enough already. You got nothing left to prove in television, but you have a lot more left to do. You owe this to Hawaii. And with that urging and whatever, a little bit before Christmas this past year, I decided I would do this. And so I gave my company fair notice, retired on January 15th, announced on February 12th at the old stadium, a place that I vigorously wanted to do it at the old stadium grounds for a couple of reasons. One, it was there, and I alluded to this earlier, Wayne, it's where I first really began to understand the great pride of local people. But it's also the same place where I began to fight for Hawaii in that setting. So I announced there that day from that setting. And then 1 month later, unfortunately, we got shut down because of COVID-19, right? So all of us had to deal with that. It's been an extraordinary campaign. Here I am now, having won in the primary, going up only one other candidate. The clock is ticking fast. Ballots will be dropped in just about 7 weeks. We've got a lot of work to do. This is a leadership job. The reason why I was interested in the mayor's job, it's a hands-on operational job. And I would tell you that the unfortunate circumstance involving COVID-19 is all the problems that I was looking at that were classic mayoral problems, issues on homelessness, the rail, infrastructure, elder care, neighborhood crime, safety, etc. All of those things have now been amplified as a result of the impact of this. So, my sense of responsibility in this leadership challenge grows by the day. I feel very confident that we're actually going to win this race. I feel like it's my destiny, and here I am in this chapter of my life, going to try to give back everything I have to give in the role of mayor of the city and county of Honolulu. That's what it's about.
Well, I appreciate that. Mr. Rick Blangiardi, mahalo for joining us. Mahalo for sharing your manao, because I think a lot of people want to hear your story, and you did that so well. Talk about fighting for Hawaii, and we wish you best of luck. But that's Rick Blangiardi, and next week we're going to have his opponent, actually, Keith Amemiya, and we'll talk some more. So we wish you the best of luck. Rick Blangiardi, aloha, and so mahalo for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you. Mahalo to you.
Aloha, guys. We'll see you on Wednesday for the next Wayne Coito Show. Take care. Bye-bye.